preface this, I love to drive. I've loved to go on drives for hours to nowhere, with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was, until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a cluster of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend. I couldn't focus on anything else and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too long since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend. I kept driving and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road were lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away. Snow started to cover them entirely. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest was jutted out onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. In this part of the country, cell phone reception is pretty bad most of the time. But more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road, at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything I would leave, and the moment there was reception I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So, again I shout, "Hey! What happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a while, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a rough voice responding to me. I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person didn't have any blood on them, nor did they appear injured in any way, and they were wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID, or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't mean to tell you that I slammed on the gas as soon as I noticed those things, and drove like a bat straight out of hell. My heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, Troy, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits he couldn't do much on his end. But he could get in contact with the local police or sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs I managed to tell him what happened, not even 10 minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, really concerned for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot to take a look and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. But with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking me if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made, in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It all started with a normal day at work. I worked at a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries, the usual minimum wage stuff. It was raining that morning, and of course, I was assigned to carts. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bags. Mind if I help you get out of the rain? Yes. Thank you so much. As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, skinned me from head to toe, and smirked. Are you a new hire? No, I've been here for a couple of months. Oh, you are very pretty, he said in a weirdly sensual tone. Thank you. Have a good day. I shut it down. I was not interested. As I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me while I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking about it. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries, and I noticed that same man from earlier walk in. I pretended I didn't see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag. He stands towering over me and says, "Are you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted a bag for one thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" Man, I'm not comfortable giving that information out." He returned with, "That's okay, you've been here what, 5 hours? You probably get off around 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what happened. She told me not to work the lot anymore and to ask someone to walk me to my car. So by the end of my shift, I had a male coworker walk me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. We didn't see him, so my coworker went back inside and I started my truck. I called my mom to tell her about what happened, and once she answered, I left the parking lot. Literally, the second I turned onto the road, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mom I thought he was going to follow me, and she just told me to drive around to try and lose him. I drove around for about 20 minutes, just going in circles around my town. I hit a red light and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he caught me. I told my mom I was going to dial 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, then call the police. While I was trying to call the cops, the man speeds ahead of my truck and starts brake checking me. Frantic, I wait for the closest intersection and turn up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run in and hide and have someone else call for help. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store and a gas station. I pulled in, parked, and ran for my life into the store. I told the clerk what's happening, and she took me to the break room and locked me in there. While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I hear the doors of the storefront start violently rattling, and before I knew it, the clerk was locking herself in the break room with me. She was on the phone with the police, and they were on their way. We were silent. Cowering in a dark room, I found myself feeling guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fear. My thoughts were racing through. I said to him, "Did I lead him on? I just told him to have a good day." Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drive? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room was illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We hear a voice over the intercom telling us it's safe to come out. Whilst shaking, the clerk took out her keys and opened the door, so we walked out and gave our statements. After the police leave, I turned to my unexpected savior and profusely thanked her. We cry, hug, and she walks me to my car. The next night I went back and brought her some food and an Amazon gift card. I have been in a near-fatal car accident 10 feet away from a mountain lion in the wild, but I can tell you, with total honesty, I thought that was the end of my line. Thank you for reading. Stay aware, be cautious, stay safe. This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago. I would have been about 26 at the time. I can't remember exactly what year this was, but it was around 2012. At the time, I was frequently going out with my friends to bars and parties, and hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on a side street just off a main road where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pretty nice, but if you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it got a little sketchier at night. After a night of hanging out, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away towards the slightly sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some kind of heavy sweater or pullover and beanie hat. This detail is only important as you couldn't really gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build. There wasn't much through traffic as you got further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any street lights. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car started slowly creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold and that I should let her give me a ride to where I was going. She seemed very friendly. I indicated that I wasn't parked far away and appreciated the offer, but was going to just keep walking. She then tried really hard to convince me to get in the car with her, since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me to make sure I wasn't a weirdo, just asking me to get in the car pretty aggressively. Based on what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way she really could have had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive, and even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in their car. There were about 10 bars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There was no reason I could think of that she would have to resort to driving around offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me and offered me a ride again, which I declined and kept going. I picked up my pace and she eventually drove off. As soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got to my car and made sure there was nobody lurking around or close by. The whole scenario felt off and didn't make sense to me. I asked my friends about it later, and all of the women agreed they wouldn't offer a random guy a ride, especially at night time, in that kind of scenario, even if the guy looked like Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. My suspicion is that there was someone laid down in the back seat of the car out of view with a weapon waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't really figure out any reason she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up random strangers. I just assumed there had to be something nefarious going on in that car, and I do wonder what would have happened if anyone just hopped in the car with her. I hope you're enjoying the stories so far. Thank you for supporting the channel. Back when I was was 18 years old, I was house sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house sitting for went to the same church as her, but I didn't really know them well myself. It was more to keep her company in a huge house. This was 1997, when the average teen like me didn't have a cell phone. During that week, there was a short break in the school calendar, which is why this family was away, and why the streets in the area were quieter than usual. My apartment, as well as the house we sat for, was not far from the university. My apartment was actually a 3-minute walk from it, and the house a further 5 minutes by car. So being a student neighborhood, it was particularly quiet this week. The first weird thing that happened during the week I was at this house was that I dreamed I was driving through a dark forest on a hilly dirt road with no lights anywhere except for those from my car's headlights. As I started to go down a hill, the headlights suddenly cut out and everything went dark. The car slowed down to a stop and died. I woke up. In the morning I went out to my car and it wouldn't start. It had been working perfectly the day before. I had to call a guy to come fix it. It was the starter motor. Well, that was the first creepy thing that happened that week. About a day later, it was Friday. I planned on driving back home to my parents, who lived in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my stuff at the big house and was going to head over to my apartment to collect whatever else I needed for the weekend. That trip between the house and apartment was, as I mentioned, only 5 minutes or so away. Since it was winter, it was dark by the time I left at around 7 p.m. As I was driving from the house, I noticed in my rear view mirror the headlights of the car behind me tailing me really close. Whenever I would turn, it would also turn. Back then I was cautious, but not overly so. Cautious enough to notice in such a short distance that something weird was going on behind me. But then when I pulled up to a traffic light, it wasn't there anymore. Relief. Short-lived. The car was now beside me. I looked to my right, and there was a man inside. Alone. Smiling at me. Looking like a maniac. For a moment I thought, geez, I should really drive with a beanie on at night so people can't see that I'm a petite 5'2" female with long blonde hair down to my waist. I also thought, well, he's in the lane to turn right, so I'm good. I pulled off, and the headlights were behind me again. What an ass, I thought. Who drives like that? Thank goodness my turn is coming up on the left soon. After another minute or two of this tailgating, I slowed down, strategically didn't indicate, and made a sudden sharp left into my driveway, opened the automatic gates, and shot inside. The gates closed behind me. I gave out a sigh of relief, thinking that the drama was over. I gathered a few things from the car to take up with me and noticed on my way over to the stairwell that there was a man at the gate that had just closed behind me. He was still on the other side, and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I could make out it was the dude from the tailgating car. He was jumping up, shaking the gate with absolute rage. Well, I was safely on this side, so I wasn't completely gripped with fear. And besides, there was a group of students making a noise nearby, arriving for a party or something. I headed to the stairs and started going from ground level to the first floor. Rounding the stairs on the first floor, I noticed someone running across the parking lot towards the staircase. In hindsight, I still can't fathom why I didn't realize what had happened. I guess it's because I subconsciously knew that there was the group being let in through the pedestrian gate. As I was rounding the staircase between the second and third floors, someone suddenly touched me. I spun around. The guy. He had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something. I said something sassy back and told him to F off. Then I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. I lived on the third floor. He grabbed me from behind and held my back against his chest with his left arm around my neck. I felt something being held against my right side. Aw, crap. A knife. He led me down. I remember thinking that the light was broken on the bottom level. This can't end well. but I was calm. I resisted slightly, and he tightened his grip. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen. I started to become a dead weight. He started to drop me. I was groin level. I elbowed. It connected. He dropped me but spun around to face me. He ripped the front of my button-down top. Then he stopped. He looked at someone behind me. Someone taller than him. His eyes went wide. He turned and ran. I screamed. Then I too turned around to see who had come to help. There was no one there, but people came out of their apartments after that. The police were called. This was the second time they were there that night. Turns out the other weird thing that happened was that my dad had already called the police and they had come past an hour before. My mom had had a weird feeling all evening and had hassled my dad endlessly that something bad was going to happen to me. She had been right. As it turned out, they caught him. I identified him in a lineup. He was a serial offender in the area. He was accused of assaulting something like 14 women. One had thrown herself out the first floor of her apartment to get away from him and broken her leg. Weeks later, the police called me. Before his trial, his cell door had been left open. He was gone. Apparently an inside job. I've had a few creepy things happen to me in my life, but this one still makes me think about how things could have gone wrong very quickly. I'm a 20-year-old female, and this story takes place back when I used to live in southern Indiana, in a seriously remote area. It was a weekend night, and my best friend and I were heading home after a graveyard shift at a local waffle joint. She decided to pick up her dog from her house so we could spend the night at my place. That's important later. We started heading into the rural countryside where I lived, and to get to my house, you had to travel down a long, narrow dirt road. About a mile in, we spotted a truck's headlights. As we got closer, we realized it was a nice truck, probably from around 2018. I can't say I know much about cars, so cut me some slack. The truck was parked sideways, blocking the entire path. Confused, I got out of the car and asked if the driver was okay. He looked hopeful when he saw me at first and said, "I'm just waiting for a friend to come get me. My truck's stuck." He smiled at me, but I noticed his pupils were nearly completely dilated. He glanced back at my car, saw that I had someone with me, and noticed the dog sticking its head out the window. His smile quickly faded, and he remarked, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." With that, he turned around and got back in his truck. I returned to my friend and said, "Put this in reverse and use whatever hood race skills you have to get us out of here." We reversed my poor 95 Caddy, which really shouldn't have been driving on a dirt road, and made our way back to the main road, feeling relieved. We took a different route home. But then, to our surprise, the same guy was parked on that road, standing off to the side, smiling and staring into our headlights. We were on the verge of panicking and floored the gas pedal the rest of the way home. I don't know how he got there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm thankful I wasn't alone, being a pretty naive college girl at the time. Even though the presence of the pit bull probably saved us from that man, the dog actually ended up randomly snapping at my friend a few months later, causing her serious injuries. It had been a good dog its entire life, and I know she was a good owner, so I guess it's just an instinct thing with pit bulls. They can snap at any moment. Please leave a like and a comment if you haven't already. What was your favorite story?